just wanted to get sort of a little bit more into it with you guys. So one of the things that a lot of people think is that a fighter's prime or a prime fighter, someone's undefeated or they're winning all their fights or they're looking spectacular in their fights all the time. That's not necessarily what it is. Let me give you an example. All right. So, for example, talking to the guy online on Facebook, Shane Mosley, for example, right? So Shane Mosley was in his prime when he faced Oscar De La Hoya. He was like 20, I think he was 29 years old when he faced Oscar De La Hoya, and he beat Oscar De La Hoya. Same age that Floyd was when he beat Oscar De La Hoya, actually. But Oscar was in his prime as well. And after Shane Mosley beat Oscar De La Hoya, I think he had 2 or 3 fights, and then he faced Vernon Forrest. Okay, and I think Shane Mosley lost to Vernon Forrest. And I think Shane Mosley was 31 years old when he first faced Vernon Forrest. I think when he had the rematch with him, I think he was 31, 32, almost somewhere there. And then after he lost to Vernon Forrest the second time, he then went on to face Raul Marquez, and I think that was a no contest. Then he went on to face Oscar De La Hoya at super welterweight. So he moved up to super welterweight. And he faced Shane Mosley again. Shane Mosley faced Oscar, sorry, again. And there he got this controversial decision as far as I'm concerned, because I thought Oscar won the fight. But he beat Oscar De La Hoya again. And then after that, he faced Winky Wright twice. He was the WBC champion. He faced Winky Wright twice, and he lost to Winky Wright twice. Now, I think he was 33, right? After that, he went on to face Ricardo Mayorga sometime a little bit in the future. He came back down to welterweight, fought 1 or 2 welterweight fights, and he went up to face Ricardo Mayorga. He was 35 years of age, I think, somewhere that 35, 36, something thereabouts. He faced Ricardo Mayorga, knocked him the spark out, okay? He was 36. I think he was 35. He fought 2 fights with Fernando Vargas. He was 35 then. And he beat Fernando Vargas twice. He was 35. And then when he was 36, fought Ricardo Mayorga, knocked him the spark out, right? Knocked Fernando Vargas the spark out as well. And then after that, he faced Antonio Margarito when he was 37. And he knocked Antonio Margarito the spark out as well, okay? Knocked him out. Now, after that, he faced Floyd Mayweather, and we all know how that went. He started off really well for Mosley, caught Floyd with a really beautiful right in the second round, caught him again with another right hand in the second round, his greatest punch, his biggest punch, and recovered from that and then beat him pretty bad. But the point is that in Mosley's prime, Mosley actually did very well, and then he did horribly. He did horribly against Vernon Forrest. Vernon Forrest, in the first fight, smashed Mosley into the canvas, knocked him down twice. Mosley looked punch drunk. He looked like he was going to be history, and he somehow managed to get through that fight and make it to the finishing bell. In the rematch, less punches were thrown. Mosley was trying to set traps. They really threw an all-time Mosley low. I think he only threw like 230 punches for the entire fight, and Vernon Forrest wasn't so far behind either. They were being extra cautious with one another, trying to set traps and stuff. And he lost that fight too. My point being, in your prime, you can lose fights. In fact, you can go into slumps in your prime years. Okay, your prime years, we can say it's like from as much as 20 years of age, depending on how you mature and how you get your man strength and all of that. It could start at 20 years of age, or you could just really be performing 20 years of age and go all the way into your 30s. It could be as late as 34, 35, how well you take care of your body. It could be as early as 30, 31, 32, 33, even in your 20s, so your late 20s. It could be the end of your prime, okay? Depending on how much wear and tear your body takes and what you can and can't do again in fights. Like some guys, they can't bob and weave like they used to, but they can't dip and slip like they used to. You know, Mike Tyson, he couldn't bob and weave like he used to. So we said his prime was so much. It's your ability. When your abilities are not, again, optimal like they used to be, that's when you come out of your prime. That's the truth about it. You can get punch drunk in the head, and all of a sudden, for the next couple of fights, you're never the same, and you don't fight the same, and that's because you're out of your prime, because you got punch drunk. Okay? So I hope that this helps people. Your prime does have to do mostly with your physical abilities, which affects your performance. It's not People say it's about learning skills and getting the peak of skills and peak of smarts, and none of that has to do with your prime because those things are developed throughout your boxing career, regardless. Experiences and so on have to deal with different situations. No, your prime has to do with your physical abilities. And if you think about it, anytime they say, well, this fighter was out of his prime, he was a shot fighter, blah, 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 it's because their physical abilities do not match what they used to have at their peak. Okay? So I hope this clears up with everybody what your prime is. Your prime has to do with how much ability you still have. And for the very, very skilled fighters, the very, very good fighters out there, and the great fighters out there, their primes are spectacular. Okay, as a result of that, and that's what gives them the best performances, and they're spectacular. But just because their performances may fade, may not be because they're out of their prime. It could be because they're going into a slump, like with Mosley. Mosley went into a slump. He's a great fighter, but once he came out of that slump, he did very, very well. And particularly, I use this because if you're looking at past generational fighters, particularly fighters from eras bygone, from the 1960s, 1950s, 1940s, 1930s, and so on, you will see that some of them went through slumps where they just lose, and then they come out of the slump, or they be losing, winning, and then they come out of the slump and they're just doing spectacularly well. Some of them did it in their prime years. Some of them did it outside of their prime years. Okay, you think of Archie Moore. Okay, once he became light heavyweight champion, he was undefeated as light heavyweight champion. He just went on and just beat everybody. He was almost near 50, and he was still beating people. He was still the best lightweight in the world, and that's remarkable. I want to say to people, when you see a fighter with longevity like Bernard Hopkins, like Manny Pacquiao, like Juan Manuel Marquez, like Floyd Mayweather, like James Toney, you know, where they're still performing at extremely high level, better than even prime fighters in their era, better than everybody. They're at the top of their division, you know. They're at the top of it, even though they're not in their prime. To me, that means a hell of a lot more than fighters who have that physical ability, but yet they cannot optimize their physical ability to the point of these guys. And the reason why there are such these rare exceptions of these fighters is, one, they take care of their bodies very well, so they can preserve as much of their prime abilities that they had with them. Two, they fight a lot smarter, so that they know when to use their optimal abilities or when to use whatever capabilities they have left in the tank. They know how to use them effectively. So instead of wasting punches and wasting stuff, they're now very much more selective, much more smart, much more cunning, much more crafty about how they go about doing it. So you find that guys like Floyd Mayweather. Mayweather was a combination of puncher. He used to throw like 6, 7, 8 punch combinations. You know, he tag you up like crazy. You know, and you look at the Arturo Gatti fight, it's just spectacular, right? Got all that energy, strength, and vibrancy. But when his shoulders and his hands were history and he really damaged those things, he came out of his prime. I would argue that Floyd Mayweather's prime began somewhere with the Gennaro Hernandez fight and went all the way up to the Ricky Hatton fight. That was the last time you ever saw Floyd really throwing fluent combinations, was in the Ricky Hatton fight. That was the last time you saw Floyd in his prime. Even when you saw the Juan Manuel Marquez fight, he wasn't throwing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 punch combinations anymore because he had bad shoulders, he had bad hands, and so he wanted to preserve them, to preserve his career. And so you never saw Floyd really. The only time I saw him do it was in his final fight against Andre Berto, where he was really letting his hands go. But his hands were so badly damaged and his knuckles that, you know, even though he almost stopped Berto in the 12th round, for the most part, he wasn't really doing much to Berto, in my opinion. And of course, Berto was in ridiculous shape. But the point is that a primed fighter, right? A prime fighter, he's able to use all his capabilities, all his skills that are on the table for him in fights. And you never really saw Floyd really throwing fluid combinations after the Ricky Hatton fight. Okay, and it wasn't because he was just more cautious of bigger fighters. I think it's because his hands and his arms and his shoulders, you know, physically he couldn't just do that like he wanted to. He had the capability to do it in spurts probably, but not all the way through like how he was when he was younger. All right, Manny Pacquiao. You could tell when Manny Pacquiao came out of his prime because his numbers, his punch output dramatically fell. And I think after the Brandon Rios fight, like I was trying to explain to the dude, after the Brandon Rios fight where he threw like 700 and something punches, it just dramatically fell to 500 and something punches against Timothy Bradley and it went to, I think it was about 500 and something punches against Chris Algieri, and then Jesse Vargas was 400 and something punches, and so on and so on and so on. Floyd Mayweather was like 100 or something. So my point, anyway, is this: um, that Manny Pacquiao's punch output actually started to drop during the years, and then it really spiked in what he thought was probably his last fight against Ugas, through like 815 punches. And when you got your last fight of your career, you're gonna let it all hang out. You're just gonna try and do your best, right? Not to say that Pacquiao wasn't capable of doing that all through his career, but he realized that he needed to save and his body, because he couldn't just go all out all the time. And you could tell the older Pacquiao, he had to have these lulls, whereas he was just nonstop buzzsaw, from round 1 to round 12 when he was younger. So you can tell when a fighter is going out of their prime, because their physical capability, the stamina, the longevity, the combinations, all of that, it's not there as much as when they're younger. And yes, you say, well, there was tougher competition as well that Pacquiao faced, and tougher competition that Floyd faced. Yeah, that's true too. He had bigger challenges. But I'm sure Pacquiao and Floyd could see some of the places where they could throw certain punches, but they didn't throw it because they realized it wasn't expedient for them to do it. They had to pace themselves, and they had to preserve their bodies